At 4:47 in the morning, Adrian Voss walked into a penthouse worth $30 million and found nothing but silence. No wife, no warmth, no sign that Lillian Hart had ever loved him at all. Only a folded letter on the kitchen island and the faint smell of her perfume fading from rooms he used to own. Men like Adrian don't lose. Men like Adrian don't get left. But tonight, the most powerful man in Manhattan was about to learn that the woman he ignored for 7 years had been planning his ending long before he noticed she was gone. If you're watching from anywhere in the world right now, drop your city in the comments so I know where this story traveled tonight. Hit that like button, subscribe, and stay with me until the very last minute, because what Lillian did next is the kind of quiet revenge that rearranges a man's entire life. Let's begin. The private elevator opened with that soft chime Adrian had stopped noticing years ago, the sound of money doing its quiet work. He stepped out onto the polished black marble of his foyer, holding a half-finished glass of bourbon from the car, his tie loose, his jacket slung over one arm. The Manhattan skyline burned behind the floor-to-ceiling windows at the end of the hall, 1,000 lit-up rectangles staring back at him like witnesses. He didn't spare it a glance. He'd bought that view. He'd stopped looking at things he already owned. "Lil?" His voice carried down the corridor, rough from whiskey and a 14-hour day. "I'm home." Nothing came back. Not the hum of the television she sometimes left on in the bedroom. Not the soft pad of bare feet on hardwood. Not even the sigh she gave him lately. That small, exhausted sound he'd started mistaking for contentment. Adrian frowned, but only a little. He took a sip from the bourbon glass, set it on the console table next to a vase of white lilies she'd arranged herself 2 days ago, and loosened his cufflinks as he walked. The penthouse was big enough that silence wasn't strange. 4 bedrooms, a library, a gym, a wine room he rarely entered, and a kitchen he barely knew how to use. Lillian was probably asleep. She usually was, when he came home at this hour. He turned into the kitchen out of habit to grab a bottle of sparkling water from the fridge, and that was when he saw it. The envelope. It sat in the exact center of the white quartz island, perfectly placed, almost ceremonial, thick cream paper, his name written across the front in her handwriting. The slanted, steady script he used to tease her about when they were younger. "You write like a school teacher," he'd said once, grinning, holding her wrist while she tried to sign a birthday card. "You write like someone who actually pays attention to what she's doing." She'd laughed. That had been a long time ago. Adrian stared at the envelope. Something cold moved under his ribs, quick and small, like a pulse that didn't belong to him. He set his jacket on the counter. He didn't pick the letter up yet. Instead, his eyes moved. The fruit bowl was empty. She usually kept it full. Apples, pears, whatever was in season at the market she liked on 74th Street. The cookbook she always left open on the counter, the one with the cracked spine and her grandmother's recipe tucked inside, was gone. The tea kettle was cold and clean, set neatly on the back burner like a prop in a magazine photograph. The air didn't smell like her anymore. It smelled like nothing. It smelled like a hotel room after housekeeping. "Lillian." He said it louder this time. Not a question, an instruction. He moved faster now, not running, but walking with that particular stride men like him used when they sensed something slipping and wanted to crush it before it became real. Down the hallway. Past the framed black and white photographs she'd hung herself. New York rooftops, a pier in Maine, a market in Lisbon where he'd been too busy on his phone to take the picture with her. Into the bedroom. The bed was made, military tight. Her side choufou. The left side, closer to the window, was cleared of everything. No book on the nightstand. No water glass with the lipstick smudge he used to find charming. No reading glasses. The framed photograph of them on the beach in the Amalfi Coast, 3 summers ago, was gone. Only a pale rectangle remained on the wood where it had stood. He opened her closet. At first, his brain refused to process what he was looking at. It took a full 5 seconds before he understood that the emptiness was the answer. Not ransacked, not messy, emptied. Hangers pushed neatly to one side like soldiers who'd been dismissed. The shoe racks that used to hold 30 pairs, Louboutins, Chanel's, the scuffed white sneakers she wore on Sundays, cleared. The top shelf where she kept her sweaters, folded the way her mother had taught her, bare. Her scarf drawer, pulled slightly open, held nothing but a single lavender sachet she must have forgotten. Adrian stood in the doorway of the closet and felt the first real edge of it. Not panic. He didn't do panic, but something adjacent. Something he couldn't put a word to yet because he'd never needed the word before. His phone was already in his hand. He didn't remember taking it out. He tapped her name. It rang once, twice, a third time, and then, "Hi, you've reached Lillian. Leave me a message." Voicemail. Her voice, calm and smooth, and recorded God knew how long ago, speaking to him from the other side of something he couldn't see yet. "Lil, where are you?" He kept his voice level. A businessman's voice, controlled, reasonable. "Call me back. I just got home. I don't—" He paused. He'd been about to say, "I don't know what this is." He didn't. He hung up instead. He walked back to the kitchen. Slowly this time. His own footsteps sounded too loud in a home that had apparently just been a stage set for the last 6 months without him noticing. The envelope waited. He picked it up. The paper was heavy, expensive. She'd bought it somewhere specific, he could tell. She'd always been deliberate about small things, and he'd always mistaken that deliberateness for softness. He slid his thumb under the flap and tore it open with more force than he meant to. The letter inside was a single page. "Adrian, by the time you read this, I'll already be gone. I know that sounds dramatic, but I promise I'm not being dramatic. I'm being clear, probably for the first time in a long time. I'm not coming back. I've filed for divorce. The papers will reach your attorney's office on Monday morning. I've taken only what's mine, and I've left everything that was ever a gift from you, including the rings. You'll find them in the safe. The combination still works. I didn't change it. I don't want your money. I don't want the penthouse. I don't want the house in the Hamptons, or the one in Aspen, or the car you had delivered for my birthday last year that I've driven exactly twice. I want you to keep all of it. I just don't want you. I know you'll want to understand. I know you'll want a conversation, an explanation, a scene. I can't give you one. I used to rehearse it in my head, the things I would say to you, the way I would shake. And then one day I realized I didn't want that either. I didn't want to hand you my hurt and watch you do what you always do with things I give you. Set it on a shelf. Forget which room you put it in. Please don't call my sister. Please don't send anyone to find me. I'm safe, I'm healthy, and I'm not coming back no matter what you say to me. I hope eventually you'll be okay. I really do. Lillian." He read it twice. Then he read it a third time because his brain was doing that thing where it insisted on going through the motions of comprehension without actually accepting the content. The way people read obituaries. The way people stare at a number on a screen and refuse to add it up. The kitchen was so quiet he could hear the refrigerator running. Adrian set the letter down, very carefully, on the island. He flattened it with one palm as if the creases had offended him. He looked at his own hand on the paper, the wedding ring he was still wearing, the faint scar on his knuckle from a rugby game in college, the gold watch his father had given him the night before he died. And for a strange, weightless second, none of it seemed like it belonged to him. He said her name out loud. Not loud, just once. "Lillian." The apartment didn't answer. Well, he'd met her 9 years earlier in a gallery on Spring Street that he'd only walked into because the woman he'd been trying to impress at the time had said she liked art. The woman, he couldn't remember her name anymore, which said something, had wandered off toward the bar, and Adrian had found himself standing in front of a painting he didn't understand, holding a glass of bad champagne, feeling bored and slightly embarrassed. "It's about her mother," a voice said from beside him. He'd turned. She was shorter than most of the women he dated, in flat black shoes and a simple navy dress. Her dark hair pulled back in a way that suggested she hadn't spent much time thinking about it. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the painting. "The artist," she said. "Her mother died when she was 11. That's why there's always a window in the corner. She said she kept trying to paint the day her mother died, and she kept getting the light wrong, so now every painting has a window, waiting for the right light." Adrian had looked at the painting again. He still didn't see it. "You know her?" he'd asked. "No." She'd finally turned to him, and he remembered now. Remembered for the first time in years, standing in his empty kitchen at 5 in the morning, that her eyes had been a very dark brown, almost black, and steady in a way that had unsettled him. "I read the program." He'd laughed. She hadn't. She'd gone back to looking at the painting. He'd asked her to dinner that week. She'd said no. He'd asked her the following week. She'd said no again, politely, with a small smile that suggested she wasn't being cruel. She just didn't want to go. On the third ask, she'd said, "Why do you keep doing this?" And he'd said, honestly, surprising himself, "Because you're the first person in a long time who hasn't cared who I am." She'd paused for a long time. Then she'd said yes. Adrian stared at the empty kitchen and realized, with the stupid belatedness of a man who'd spent nearly a decade being told what to do by his own reflection, that she'd probably been deciding something in that pause. And he'd mistaken her hesitation for shyness. He'd mistaken a lot of things. Thus, he poured himself another bourbon. His hand was steady, which annoyed him. He felt as though his hand shouldn't have been steady under the circumstances. He wanted a physical symptom. He wanted his body to betray the moment properly. He dialed her sister. Claire picked up on the fourth ring. Her voice was not sleepy. That was the first thing he noticed. It was almost 5 in the morning on a Thursday, and Claire, who lived in Brooklyn and worked in publishing and had 2 small children, was not sleepy. She'd been expecting him. "Adrian? Where is she, Claire?" "I can't tell you that." "Claire." He pressed his thumb hard into his eye socket. "Don't do this."
"I'm not doing anything, Adrian."
"She is.
And she asked me not to tell you. And for the first time in my life, I'm going to do something my little sister asks me to do without arguing about it." "Is she safe?"
"Yes."
"Is she—"
He stopped. The next word was going to be alone, and he was self-aware enough in that second to understand that the word he actually wanted to ask was with someone else. He didn't ask it. Some small piece of him he hadn't used in years stepped in front of his mouth and stopped him. "She's fine, Adrian," Claire said. Her voice softened, not toward him but toward something else, some older, exhausted thing between the two of them. "She's really fine. She's better than fine. That's sort of the point. I need to talk to her." "No, you don't. You want to talk to her. That's different. And she gets to decide whether she wants to talk to you, which, for the record, she currently does not." He closed his eyes. He felt a muscle jump in his jaw. "Claire, please." There was a long silence on the line. He could hear her breathing. He could hear a refrigerator in her kitchen. Or maybe it was still his. The two sounds were the same. "Adrian," Claire said finally, and her voice had that slow, flat quality of a person who'd rehearsed what she was about to say and was still a little surprised to be saying it. "I'm going to tell you one thing, and then I'm going to hang up. And you're not going to call me again, because if you do, I'm going to block your number and so will my husband. Okay?" "Okay." She waited. She waited a really, really long time for you to notice her. And you didn't, that's all. That's the whole story. There's no other man. There's no breakdown. There's no scandal you can pay to make go away. She just got tired, Adrian. And one day she stopped waiting. And you weren't there to see it happen, which is ironically exactly why it happened. "Claire, good night, Adrian." The line went dead. He stood in the kitchen for a long time after that. The bourbon in his glass went warm. The sky outside the long window started to turn the particular color Manhattan gets at dawn in late autumn. A bruised gray with a thin peach seam at the horizon, the color of something that had been hit and was beginning to heal around the wrong bones. He didn't sleep. By 7, he was in his home office, a tall room with a wall of books he'd never read, and a desk made from the hatch cover of a Portuguese freighter. His laptop was open. His phone was face down. His tie was on the floor. He did what men like Adrian did when they were frightened. He worked the problem. He called his attorney, Marcus Feld, and pulled him out of bed. Marcus had been Adrian's lawyer for 12 years. He'd drafted the prenup Lillian had signed in a hotel conference room a week before their wedding, the one she'd read all the way through, cover to cover, while Marcus and Adrian ate pastries and pretended not to watch her. Adrian had been irritated back then by how long it took her. He realized now she'd been the only adult in the room. "She's filing?" Marcus said, his voice the rasp of someone who just stood up too fast. "Lillian, our Lillian." "Yes." "On what grounds?" "It didn't say. It's a letter, a personal letter. She said the papers will be at your office Monday." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Adrian could hear him moving through his apartment, the soft patter of slippers on a wooden floor, the click of a kettle. Marcus was 62 and a widower, and his voice was always steadier than any room he entered. "Adrian," he said carefully, "can I ask you something as your friend and not your lawyer?" "No?" "I'm going to ask anyway. Did she find out? Adrian's jaw locked. He didn't answer. Because if she did, Marcus went on, gentler than he'd ever been, and if she waited this long to leave, then what you're dealing with is not an impulse decision, and it's not going to unwind with flowers and an apology. You understand that, right? She didn't find out. Adrian.
Marcus. He leaned forward over the desk. He stared at the grain of the old wood, the nicks and scorch marks from the freighter's life before his. She didn't find out. All right, Marcus said, in the voice of a man who had just decided to let someone else hang themselves. I'll be ready Monday. Don't do anything stupid until then. Don't call her. Don't send anyone to find her. Don't post on anything. Not that you would. Be quiet. Be invisible. Let me handle this. Marcus. Yes?
Adrian hesitated. He looked at the windows. The dawn had fully come up while he hadn't been looking. The city was pink and gold and indifferent. I didn't think she'd actually leave. The words came out before he could refine them into something stronger. They sat on the desk between him and the phone, small and pathetic, and he hated them immediately. Marcus, to his credit, didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said, Yeah, I know you didn't. That's sort of the point, isn't it? He hung up. Adrian sat alone in a room lined with books no one had ever read and thought, for the first time in 20 years, about his father. His father had been a bricklayer in Queens until Adrian was 11, and then the money had come, not from the bricks, from his father's brother, who died childless and left behind a small commercial real estate portfolio that turned out not to be so small after all. His father had spent the next 20 years turning that accident into an empire, and then he dropped dead in his office at 58 of a heart attack his doctors had been warning him about for a decade. Adrian had been 24 when it happened. He'd taken over the company and, within 3 years, made it bigger than his father had ever dreamed. He'd bought his mother a house in Sarasota and paid for his younger sister's doctorate and put his cousins through college, and in the quiet parts of his own head, he'd believed, genuinely, without irony, that he was a generous man. He'd met Lillian a year after his father died, and when she'd said yes to him, finally, after months of polite resistance, he'd thought of his father. He'd thought, my old man would have liked her. She has his thing, that quietness, that thing where they don't tell you what they think until you've already shown them who you are. He'd thought his father would have been proud. He wondered now, staring at the ceiling of his empty penthouse, what his father would have said about tonight. He thought he knew. He thought his father would have said, Son, you don't get to be rich and kind. You picked. You picked a long time ago, and you didn't even notice you were picking. And now a good woman has walked out of your life, and you're sitting in a room you bought her, and you can't understand why the room is so quiet. He thought his father might have said, Sit with it. Sit in the quiet. You earned the quiet. Adrian stood up. He poured the rest of the bourbon down the sink. He put his hands on the edge of the counter and breathed through his nose the way his trainer had taught him, the way men like him breathed when they were about to do something controlled and expensive. Then he did what he always did when the walls got tight. He went to work. Voss Holdings occupied the top 11 floors of a black glass tower in Midtown. Adrian kept a private office on the 52nd floor with a window that faced north, so he could see the park without having to see Fifth Avenue. His assistant, Dana, a sharp-faced woman of 41, with a son in his second year of college, and a tolerance for Adrian's moods that bordered on the miraculous, was already at her desk when he arrived at 8:15, which was itself unusual. He was usually the first one in. She looked up. Her face changed, very slightly. She'd seen the bourbon on him, or the sleeplessness, or something else she wasn't going to name. "Good morning," she said carefully. "Clear my day." "All of it?" "All of it. Reschedule Quan. Push the Atlanta call. Tell Harrison I'll see him Thursday." "The board dinner tonight?" "Send Prescott in my place. He's been wanting a turn." "Adrian." Dana set her pen down. She'd worked for him for 9 years, and in those 9 years she had called him by his first name perhaps 5 times, always at moments like this one. "Is everything all right?" He looked at her. He considered, for half a second, telling the truth. The idea shocked him, how close he came to doing it. He hadn't told the truth to anyone who worked for him in more than a decade. He'd lost the ability. "Everything's fine," he said. "Personal matter. Clear the day." "Of course."
He walked into his office and shut the door and stood for a long moment in the middle of the room without turning on the lights. The park lay below him, half gold, half gray, the trees just past peak color, runners along the reservoir. A Saturday morning feel to it, except it wasn't Saturday. He wondered if she was down there somewhere. He wondered if she'd left the city entirely. He doubted it. Lillian loved New York the way transplants loved it. More than natives, more than she loved him sometimes, with a quiet, fierce loyalty he used to find excessive. She'd grown up in Connecticut, and the city had been her rebellion, and she'd never fully gotten over the first time she'd walked across the Brooklyn Bridge at sunset when she was 22. It felt like an answer, she'd told him once, early, before he'd stopped listening to her metaphors. Like I'd been asking a question my whole life, and then I was standing on the bridge and somebody said, "Here, this is it." He pressed his forehead against the cool glass of the window. His phone buzzed in his jacket. He pulled it out fast enough that he embarrassed himself. It wasn't her. It was Natalia. "Hey, you ghosted me last night. Everything okay?" He stared at her name on the screen until the screen went dark. Then he turned the phone over, laid it face down on his desk, and walked away from it. Natalia Reyes was 29 years old. She was a junior associate in the firm's real estate division, which was Adrian's stated reason for knowing her and his actual reason for having dinner with her 3 nights a week in a restaurant on East 64th that his driver had a standing reservation at. She was brilliant, in a hungry way. She was beautiful, in a way he'd stopped being able to tell apart from ambition. She had laughed at every joke he'd ever made, and at some point in the last year, he couldn't remember exactly when, he'd stopped being able to tell whether the jokes were funny. He thought about her now, sitting in his office, and he could not for the life of him remember what color her eyes were. He sat down at his desk. He opened his laptop. He stared at a quarterly earnings report for 11 minutes without reading a single sentence. Then he closed the laptop, picked up his phone, and texted Natalia back. "I'm sorry, family emergency. I'm going to be out of pocket for a while. I'll call you next week." He'd never call her next week. He knew that, writing it. He was fairly sure she'd know it, reading it. Natalia was not stupid. That was, he could admit now, part of what had drawn him to her. She was sharp enough to see the shape of the thing and pretend she didn't. Pretend was a favor she'd extended to him. He'd mistaken that favor for devotion. "Oh no, is everything okay?" "Yes. Just something I need to handle. Take care of yourself." He put the phone face down again. He did not feel triumphant. He did not feel relieved. He felt like a man who had just swept a small mess off a counter without realizing he'd been eating off that counter for a year and a half. He thought very clearly for the first time, "I am going to be alone for a while." The thought did not frighten him exactly. It was worse than fear. It was the flat recognition of a fact he had arranged for himself without knowing he was arranging it. He didn't go home that night. He took a room at a hotel on Madison, the Carlyle, because it was close, because the bartender downstairs didn't make small talk, because he did not want to go back to the penthouse and open her closet again and stand in the doorway of a room that had already forgotten him. He ordered a steak he didn't eat. He watched an old Bogart movie on the hotel television with the sound off. At some point around 2 in the morning, he stood on the balcony in his shirt sleeves, the October air cold enough to clear his head, and looked out at the part of the city where his wife was sleeping in a bed he could not find. He thought about the night they'd met. He thought about the way she'd paused before saying yes to dinner. He thought about the first fight they'd ever had, 4 months into their marriage, when she'd told him, calm, dry-eyed, the way she'd told him everything, that she did not want him to decide her career for her. He'd arranged a position for her at a gallery she hadn't applied to. He'd thought he was being generous. She told him he'd been being afraid. "You don't like that I do things you don't understand," she'd said. "So you try to put me inside things you understand." "I know what you're doing, Adrian. I just want you to know that I know." He'd apologized that night. He remembered because it was the last time he'd really apologized to her. Every apology after that had been a transaction. Flowers, jewelry, a weekend in Paris. He'd bought her forgiveness so many times that the buying had become the apology, and then the buying had stopped requiring forgiveness at all. And then the buying had just become a thing he did, like breathing, like signing deals. He wondered how long ago she'd stopped accepting the transaction. He suspected it had been a very long time. He went home at dawn. The penthouse smelled the same as it had the morning before. Like nothing.
like somewhere no one lived. He walked through each room slowly, not looking for her this time, looking for the places she'd been. A water ring on the end table in the library, a chipped mug in the back of the cabinet, her favorite, from a pottery shop in Maine, the one with a hairline crack she refused to let him replace, a hair tie in the bathroom drawer coiled neatly, as though she'd set it down and then decided not to take it with her, a paperback novel on the shelf in the guest room, a bookmark a third of the way through. Stoner, by John Williams. He'd never read it. He pulled it off the shelf and turned it over in his hands and felt, for the first time, a grief that didn't belong to his ego. She'd left parts of herself here, small parts. Parts she'd probably meant to take and had forgotten, or parts she'd chosen to leave because she didn't want them anymore. He couldn't tell which, and that was the thing that hurt. That he couldn't tell. That after 9 years of knowing her, he didn't know which objects she would have chosen to leave behind and which she would have grieved losing. He sat on the edge of the guest bed with the paperback in his lap. He did not cry. Men like him didn't cry. Men like him, he'd been told this, though no one had ever said it straight to him, and he'd absorbed it the way boys in his neighborhood absorbed any instruction about what men were. Men like him turned feelings into strategies. He'd turned his father's death into a company. He'd turned his mother's loneliness into a house in Sarasota. He'd turned his own fear of being loved for the wrong reasons into a marriage to a woman who didn't seem to want anything from him. And then he'd spent 9 years failing to give her the one thing she'd actually wanted, which was his attention. He set the paperback on the nightstand. He stood up. He walked back to the kitchen. The letter was still on the island, exactly where he'd left it. He picked it up and read it for a fourth time, slowly, carefully, the way Lillian used to read contracts in hotel conference rooms while the men around her ate pastries. I don't want you. 4 words. He'd missed them on the first 3 reads. He folded the letter along its original creases. He placed it in the breast pocket of his jacket. He took a long breath. Then he poured a cup of coffee. The pot she'd programmed still running, still set to the time she used to wake him, 6:30, brewed for a man who wasn't home. And he sat at the island and he drank it, and he thought about the long, strange, quiet walk back through his own life he was about to take. He thought, she waited for me. He thought, she waited for years. He thought, and I didn't look up. The coffee was still warm. He drank it slowly. Out past the long window, the sun was coming up over the East River for the second morning in a row without her in it. The city was already loud, already moving, already full of people pretending they were the center of something. Adrian Voss sat in a kitchen that had stopped belonging to him and watched the light hit the water and understood, maybe for the first time in his adult life, that he had finally lost something he could not buy back. The coffee grew cold in his hand before he finished it. Adrian set the cup down on the island next to the folded letter, and for a long time he simply sat there, watching the light change on the water. Somewhere around 8, the phone on the counter started buzzing. Dana, then Marcus, then Dana again, and he let it buzz. The sound of it was distant, the way alarms sound when you're underwater. He thought about calling her one more time. He thought about what he would say if she picked up. He ran through a dozen opening lines in his head and hated all of them. Lil, I'm sorry. Too late and too small. Lil, can we just talk? She'd already answered that one with a letter. Lil, please come home. Home to what? Home to whom? The man she'd written that letter to was not a man she was going to come home to, and Adrian, for the first time, could not pretend otherwise. He pushed the phone away from him across the quartz. It slid almost to the edge and stopped. He thought, instead, about going backwards. Not to fix anything. He was not that stupid anymore. Not at 9 in the morning on the worst day of his life. But because a man who loses something wants, very badly, to know when he lost it. He wants a date. He wants a scene. He wants to be able to point at one evening and say, there, that was the one. If I'd come home an hour earlier, if I'd said the thing instead of the other thing, if I'd noticed. The trouble was that Adrian Voss, sitting in his kitchen on a Thursday morning, could not remember exactly when he'd stopped looking at his wife. He could remember the beginning. He could remember the middle, sort of, in the way you remember a highway drive, long and blurred and punctuated by signs. He could not remember the last time she'd laughed at something he said and meant it. He could not remember the last time he'd asked her a question that wasn't about logistics. Did you eat? Are we doing the thing Saturday? Did the car come? Those weren't questions, those were airport announcements. He closed his eyes. He tried to go back to a night he could actually see, and what came to him, unbidden, was not the night she left, not the night she found out, not even the wedding, or any of the trips, or any of the birthdays. What came to him was a Tuesday in March, 8 months earlier, in his home office at the back of the penthouse. He'd been on a call with Tokyo. It had been running long, and Lillian had stood in the doorway for a full minute waiting before he'd looked up. He remembered the look on her face now with a clarity that embarrassed him. She'd had her hair up. She'd been wearing the cream sweater he'd bought her in London, the one she loved. She'd been holding 2 wine glasses. She'd had a small, almost apologetic smile on her face, the smile of a person who knew she was interrupting and wasn't sure if the interruption would be welcome. He had held up one finger, the universal gesture. Wait. He had watched her face change. It had changed the way a window changes when someone closes a shade. Nothing big, nothing dramatic, just a small dimming. And then she'd nodded. Polite, because she was always polite, and she'd turned and walked back down the hallway with the wine glasses. He'd heard a cabinet open and close. He'd heard nothing else. He'd finished the call 40 minutes later. He'd come out of the office expecting to find her in the living room. She wasn't there. He'd found her in bed, already asleep or pretending to be. He hadn't checked. He hadn't wanted to find out. He'd taken off his clothes and gotten in beside her and kissed her shoulder and turned off the light and fallen asleep thinking about Tokyo. He had not thought about the wine glasses again until right now, sitting in his kitchen on a morning that was no longer his. He understood, with a dull and late kind of precision, that that had not been a small moment. It had been one of the moments, one of the dozens, maybe hundreds, in which Lillian Hart had brought him a small offering, and he had held up one finger and she had slowly, quietly stopped making offerings. He opened his eyes. "God damn it," he said, to no one, in a voice he didn't recognize. He got up. He walked to the window. He pressed his forehead against the glass the way he had at the office, because it was the only thing in the apartment that still felt cold enough to remind him he was inside a body. It was Marcus who finally made him answer the phone. Not the first 2 calls. The 5th? Marcus was not a man who called 5 times in a row unless something was on fire. "Adrian." "I'm here." "Okay. Good. You're alive." A pause. "I need to tell you something, and I want you to listen to me without doing the thing you do when someone tells you something you don't like." "What thing?" "The thing where you pretend you're not listening, and then later you pretend you never heard it." Adrian exhaled through his nose. "Fine, go." "I had breakfast this morning with Hal Tannen." Marcus paused again, long enough to let the name land. Hal Tannen was the senior partner at the matrimonial firm Marcus would have called first if Adrian had asked him who to call. Hal is representing Lillian. A beat, a real one. Adrian felt it in his chest. "Since when?" "Since February." The number hit him in the stomach. "February. 8 months ago." 8 months ago, his wife had been calmly, carefully sitting in another man's office, hiring a lawyer whose name Adrian knew, whose phone number was in Adrian's own contacts, whose wife Lillian had sat next to at a benefit 3 years in a row. 8 months ago. While he had been standing in his doorway, holding up one finger at the woman with 2 wine glasses, that woman had already written the first draft of her ending. "Marcus, I'm telling you because I want you to understand what we're dealing with. This isn't a woman who left you yesterday. This is a woman who left you a long time ago and spent 9 months making sure the leaving was clean. Hal doesn't take sloppy cases. He doesn't take emotional cases. He takes cases where the outcome is already decided and he just has to walk it through the courthouse. Do you understand what I'm saying to you?" "Yes." "No, Adrian, I want you to actually hear it. She didn't panic. She didn't spiral. She didn't run off with anyone. She sat down with the best matrimonial attorney in the city, and she made a plan, and she executed the plan, and she waited until the plan was watertight, and then she wrote you a letter and walked out of your house. That's not hurt. That's not heartbreak. That's a verdict." Adrian sat down. He hadn't realized he'd been standing. "What does she want?" "Nothing. That's what I'm trying to tell you. She wants the clothes in her suitcase and her own savings account, which, for the record, is substantial. She's apparently been squirreling away her share of the rental income from that place in the village for about 4 years, and she wants her name back. She doesn't want $1 of yours. She signed the prenup, so she couldn't get much anyway, but She's refusing even what she's entitled to. She's walking away clean. That's... Adrian stopped. He didn't know what that was. Impossible was the first word that came to him, but he swallowed it because it wasn't impossible. It was just the thing a man like him could not previously have imagined. A woman walking out of his life and refusing to take anything of his with her. Not even the scar. Yeah, Marcus said quietly. It's something. What do I do? You sign the papers when they arrive. You don't contest anything. You don't try to fight her on custody. There's no kids, thank God. We're not doing that to anyone. You don't send her lilies. You don't show up at her sister's. You don't have an associate at my firm drive past the places you think she might be. You behave like a grown man whose wife has asked him to leave her alone, and you leave her alone. That's what you do. That's the whole list. Marcus, I know. I know what you're going to ask, and the answer is no. I don't know where she is. And even if I did, I wouldn't tell you, because she's my client's client now, and I have an obligation, and also because, Adrian, I love you, but she's right. It was the last part that stopped him. Marcus never said I love you. Marcus didn't say it to his own son, who was 34 and lived in Denver and had stopped calling him 3 Christmases ago. For Marcus to say it to Adrian at 9:20 in the morning on a Thursday meant the kind of thing Marcus did not know how to say any other way. Okay, Adrian said. Okay? Okay, I'll behave. Good man. Marcus hung up. Adrian sat at the island for a long time with the phone face down on the quartz, and then he stood up, and he went into the bedroom, and he did the first thing in years he had done without deciding in advance to do it. He opened her closet again, and he stood there, and he looked at the emptiness of it, and he said, out loud, to no one, to her, to the ghost of her, I'm sorry. The closet didn't answer. It wasn't going to. But the word had been said for the first time in he didn't know how long, to someone who wasn't in a negotiation. He stood there for another minute. Then he shut the door softly this time and went to take a shower. She had been 3 miles away the entire time. Lillian Hart was not in Connecticut. She was not in Paris, which was where Adrian had, in a small, pathetic corner of his brain, hoped she'd gone, because then the running would make sense. She'd always loved Paris. She'd always talked about a sabbatical. He'd always teased her about it. She was in Brooklyn. Not Claire's Brooklyn, the brownstone Brooklyn of strollers and farmers markets, but a quieter pocket of it, a 2-bedroom rental on a tree-lined street in a neighborhood Adrian had driven through maybe twice in his life. Both times on the way to somewhere else. She had signed the lease in March, a month after hiring Hal Tannen. She had paid the first 6 months in cash from the account Adrian didn't know about, a small, boring checking account at a credit union in Queens, opened in her maiden name, built up dollar by dollar over 4 years from the rent on a studio she'd inherited from her grandmother, and never told him she still owned. Adrian had once asked, casually, what had happened to that apartment. She'd said she'd sold it. He'd believed her. He'd had no reason not to. He had not asked a follow-up question. She had been moving her things into the Brooklyn apartment for 5 months, a box at a time. A box on a Tuesday when he was in Atlanta. A box on a Saturday when he was golfing. A single suitcase of books on a Sunday afternoon when he told her he was going to the office but had actually gone to Natalia's. She had known he was lying. She hadn't cared. She'd been grateful on that particular Sunday that his lying had given her 3 extra hours to move her grandmother's silver out of the penthouse without having to explain herself. She had not told anyone except Claire and her therapist. She was sitting now at 9:47 on the morning after she'd left him at a small wooden kitchen table in the Brooklyn apartment, drinking tea out of the chipped Maine mug she had taken with her after all, wearing a sweater she'd owned since college and a pair of jeans she hadn't fit into in 3 years and fit into again now. Her hair was loose. She had not cried. She had not slept well exactly, but she had slept. She had slept in her own bed, in her own apartment, in her own life, for the first time in a very long time. Her phone was face up on the table next to her mug. It had been ringing on and off all morning. Adrian, then Claire, which she'd picked up, then Adrian again. Then a number she didn't recognize, which she suspected was Marcus, which she didn't pick up. She was not hiding, she just wasn't answering. There was a difference. She watched the phone buzz across the table for the 4th or 5th time that morning, and she felt she would try to describe it later to her therapist, and she would fail,
because the feeling did not have a name in the vocabulary of the life she'd been living, a quiet, almost embarrassed relief. She was not joyful. Joy was going to take longer, but she was also not the thing she'd been for the last 2 years, which was a woman slowly disappearing inside a marriage that had decided she was furniture. The phone stopped buzzing. She turned it face down. Claire had offered to come over. Lillian had said no. Lillian had said, "I want one day by myself, one whole day. I want to sit in my own kitchen, in my own apartment, and not talk to anyone for 24 hours. Is that allowed?" "It's allowed," Claire had said. "I'm proud of you." "Don't be proud of me yet." "Why not?" "Because I haven't done anything yet. I just stopped doing something. Being proud of me for this is like being proud of someone for taking their hand off a hot stove." Claire had been quiet on the phone for a moment. "Lil, you had your hand on that stove for years. You're allowed to be proud of the fact that you finally took it off." Lillian had not said anything to that. She had said, "I love you," and hung up and sat at her kitchen table and watched the steam rise off her tea, and she had let herself feel, for 10 or 15 long seconds, the clean, strange fact of being alone in a room that belonged only to her. She looked around the apartment now. It was small in the way Adrian would have sneered at, though she understood now that the sneer had always been fear. 2 bedrooms, one of which she'd set up as a studio, a galley kitchen, a living room with a bay window that got southern light in the afternoons, a radiator that clanked. The floors were old and uneven, and she had, against the advice of the rental agent, refused to cover them with rugs. She wanted to hear her own footsteps for a while. She had not heard her own footsteps on her own floor in almost a decade. The walls were mostly bare. She had hung exactly 3 things so far: a small oil painting of a harbor in Maine that her grandmother had left her, a black and white photograph she had taken in Lisbon, the one Adrian had been too busy on his phone to take with her, and in the kitchen, a framed drawing her niece had made her, a stick figure portrait of Aunt Lily with a giant smiling sun over her head, and the words, "I love you," in shaky kindergarten letters underneath. She had taken it down from the fridge at Claire's house 2 years ago and carried it around in her purse ever since. She had finally put it on a wall. She sat with her tea and she let the quiet settle. She thought, not for the first time, about the night she had known she was going to leave him. Not the night she had found out. That had been its own thing, and she did not want to live inside that night again unless she had to. The night she had known was different. It was later. It was months after. It was a Wednesday in the fall, a year ago now. She had come home from a pottery class at a studio in the West Village. She had started taking the class in secret, which was in itself a diagnosis. The fact that she'd started hiding innocent hobbies from her own husband. And she had walked into the penthouse and found Adrian in the living room on the couch. He had been alone. He had been watching a basketball game with the sound turned down. He had a drink in his hand. He had looked up when she came in, and he had smiled at her, and it had been a perfectly nice smile. The kind of smile a man gives a woman he lives with, and she had realized, standing in the doorway with clay still under her fingernails, that she could not remember the last time that smile had been for her, and not just at her. She had smiled back. She had said, "Hey." She had gone into the bedroom and taken off her coat and sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her own hands. And she had thought, quite clearly, the way you think a sentence that has been waiting for you. "He does not see me anymore, and I'm going to stop waiting for him to start." She hadn't cried. She hadn't raged. She had gone back out to the living room and sat next to him on the couch and asked him who was playing. He had told her. She had not cared. She had understood, in that moment, that she was going to leave him. And she had understood, too, that the leaving was going to take her a year, and that the year was going to look, from the outside, like a marriage. That had been 13 months ago. She had executed the year almost exactly the way she had imagined it, which both impressed and depressed her in roughly equal amounts. The phone buzzed again. She didn't look at it. She got up. She rinsed her mug at the sink. She looked out her kitchen window, the one that looked onto a small back garden belonging to the downstairs neighbors, an older couple whose names she'd already learned, Marta and Sal, who had come up the first day she moved in with a tin of cookies and a look of frank, unsentimental welcome. The kind of welcome that didn't ask any questions and didn't need to. Lillian had stood in her own doorway holding a tin of homemade cookies from strangers, and she had almost, finally, cried. Not from the cookies, but from the simple fact that in 9 years of living in the sky with Adrian,
Not one neighbor had ever knocked on their door for any reason at all.
She had thanked Marta. She had closed the door. She had eaten 2 cookies standing up in her kitchen with her coat still on. They had been very good cookies.
Now she put the kettle back on. She wasn't hungry yet. She thought she might walk to the bakery on the corner later. She thought she might also not do that. She thought she might sit on the floor in the empty studio room for an hour and decide where the easel was going to go. She thought she might do nothing at all for the rest of the day. She was allowed to do nothing. That was one of the things about her life now. She was not naive. She knew what was coming. She knew Adrian would not, in fact, leave her alone. Not because he was cruel, though he was capable of cruelty, but because he was a man who had never had to accept the word no on a scale that mattered. He would push. He would charm. He would apologize. He would escalate. He would, at some point, probably show up somewhere she was. She had prepared for all of it. Hal Tannen had walked her through the whole choreography. She had a plan for the first phone call she might accidentally answer. She had a plan for the first time he would appear in her life uninvited. She had a script, even, which she had written down on an index card and kept in the drawer of her bedside table, so that if she panicked and forgot what she wanted to say, she could read it off the card, like a hostage proof-of-life statement. She hoped she wouldn't need the card. She suspected she would. Back in the penthouse, Adrian stood in his walk-in closet in a towel and tried to pick a suit. He could not pick a suit. The suits hung in front of him in their neat gray and navy rows, each on its wooden hanger, each pressed and steamed and brushed by a man in the building named Henry, who had been pressing Adrian's suits for 11 years. Adrian stared at them and felt absurdly like a stranger in his own closet. He did not know where he was going. He did not know why he needed a suit. He had already told Dana to clear the day. He had no meetings. He had no dinners. He had nothing to do except not be in the apartment. He picked a charcoal one because it was closest. He dressed mechanically. Tie, cufflinks. The watch, because a man did not leave the house without a watch. Shoes that had been shined last Tuesday. He looked at himself in the long mirror at the end of the closet and did not like what he saw. He looked like a man dressed for a funeral. He supposed, in a way, he was. He left the apartment. He did not know where he was going to go, but he knew he couldn't stay. The elevator down to the lobby felt like it took 3 times as long as usual. He nodded at the doorman, a tall Nigerian man named Emmanuel, who had worked in the building for 6 years and who said, "Good morning, Mr. Voss," with the careful neutrality of a man who had almost certainly seen a great many suitcases leave the building in the last 48 hours without mentioning it. "Morning, Emmanuel." "Car, sir?" Adrian paused. Normally the car was waiting. Normally he had told Dana the night before to have the car waiting. He hadn't told Dana anything. The car was not waiting. "No," Adrian said. "I'll walk." Emmanuel's face did not move. But Adrian, who had known Emmanuel for 6 years and had somehow never noticed that Emmanuel was a person, saw something flicker there anyway. Sympathy, maybe. Or recognition. Or the quiet universal acknowledgement of one man to another that something had broken. "Take care, sir," Emmanuel said. "Yeah," Adrian said. "You too." He walked out onto the sidewalk. The October air hit his face. The city was loud and ordinary and full of people who did not know or care that Adrian Voss had lost his wife, and for a moment he stood at the corner of 76th and 5th with his hands in his pockets, and he let himself be one of them. Anonymous. Unremarkable. A man in a suit. He walked into the park. He didn't have a reason. He just walked. He walked past the reservoir, past the joggers, past a woman teaching her small dog to sit, past an old man on a bench reading a newspaper the way old men had been reading newspapers on that bench since before Adrian was born. The trees were past peak. Leaves came down around him in slow, unserious drifts. He walked all the way across the park without thinking about it, and when he came out the other side, he was on Central Park West, and he didn't know what to do with himself. He ended up, eventually, in a diner on Amsterdam and 81st. He had never been in it before. He didn't even know its name. It was the kind of place Adrian Voss did not go. A narrow, fluorescent-lit room with laminated menus and a Greek man behind the counter and a line of old men at the stools who were clearly regulars. He sat in a booth by the window. A waitress maybe 50 years old with a name tag that said, Carmen brought him a menu without asking him anything. "Coffee?" "Please." She brought him coffee in a thick white cup. She brought him a little metal pitcher of half and half. She brought him a glass of water he hadn't asked for. She didn't look at his suit. She didn't look at his watch. She looked at him the way she looked at all her customers, which was with the mild, busy attention of a woman who had a lot of tables to turn and no time for anyone's story. He ordered eggs. He didn't know why. He never ate eggs. He sat in the booth with his coffee, and he watched the city go by the window, and he realized with a small, unpleasant shock that he could not remember the last time he had eaten a meal alone without a laptop open in front of him. Not in a restaurant, not at home, not in an airport. He could not remember the last time he had been in a room with a meal and no device and no person and no purpose other than to eat the meal. He was 41 years old. He did not know how to sit still anymore. He made himself sit still. The eggs came. They were terrible. They were wonderful. He ate them slowly. Carmen came back twice to top up his coffee. The second time she paused for half a second longer than she needed to, and she said, "You doing okay, hun?" He looked up. He didn't know what his face was doing. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I'm good. Thank you." She nodded. She moved on. He ate half the eggs. He left the rest. He left Carmen a $50 tip on a $12 check, which he suspected was both a tell and an apology and a tip all at once. And he walked out into the afternoon and started walking again with no destination in mind. He thought about calling Lillian. He thought about it harder than he had thought about anything in months. He took out his phone. He pulled up her name. His thumb hovered. He could feel very precisely the shape of the thing he wanted to do. He wanted to hear her voice, not to plead, not to argue, just to hear her say his name one more time, because it occurred to him for the first time that the last time she had said it had probably been days or weeks ago, in some ordinary moment he had not bothered to remember, and he had not known at the time that it was the last time. And now he would never know which Adrian of hers had been the last one. He almost called. He didn't. Marcus's voice came back to him instead. "You behave like a grown man whose wife has asked him to leave her alone, and you leave her alone." He put the phone back in his pocket. He kept walking. He walked for almost 2 hours. He walked down Broadway until he hit the 50s, and then he cut across to 6th, and then he walked all the way down to the public library and stopped, for reasons he didn't examine, on the steps between the two stone lions. People moved around him. A kid on a skateboard. A tourist taking a picture. A pigeon that seemed to believe he had food. He stood at the top of the steps with his hands in his pockets, and he looked down the avenue, at the glass towers rising above the old stone city, at the traffic, at the cabs, at his own life, and he thought, with a dull, honest, unpleasant clarity, "I have spent 20 years building this, and I do not know a single person in it who would come sit in a diner with me today." It was not a self-pitying thought. He had enough left in him to know the difference. It was just a count. A man took stock. A man made the ledger. And the ledger was what it was. He walked back uptown slowly as the light went gold. When he got back to the penthouse, and it had already stopped being home in some quiet interior way, had already become just the penthouse, the building in which he currently slept. There was a courier in the lobby, a young woman with a clipboard and a thin manila envelope. Emmanuel caught his eye across the lobby, a small warning. "Mr. Voss?" the courier said. "Yes." "I have a delivery for you. I need a signature." He signed. She handed him the envelope. She left. He stood in the lobby of his own building with the envelope in his hand, and he knew what it was before he opened it, because he had known since 4:47 that morning what this day was going to deliver to his door before it was over. He rode the elevator up alone. He walked into the penthouse. He sat on the couch in the living room, the long gray one Lillian had picked out 4 years ago from a store on Lafayette that she had dragged him to on a Saturday. He opened the envelope. He read the first page. He read the second page. He read the third. The petition was dry. The petition was clean. The petition was exactly what Marcus had said it would be, and worse, because seeing a thing laid out in a lawyer's paragraphs was always worse than being told about it in a man's voice. Petitioner seeks dissolution of marriage. Petitioner waives any and all claims to marital property acquired during the marriage. Petitioner requests restoration of maiden name, Hart. He read those last 3 words twice. Restoration of maiden name, Hart. She didn't want to be a Voss anymore. She didn't even want to carry the name. He set the papers on the coffee table. He leaned back on the couch. The light through the window was the color of brandy. He could hear, faintly, the city moving on outside without him. He sat there for a long time, in the suit he hadn't needed, in the apartment he'd bought her, on the couch she'd chosen, and he did not move. He didn't cry, he didn't call anyone, he didn't pour a drink. He just sat on the couch with his hands flat on his thighs, and he stared at the petition on the coffee table, and he understood slowly and completely that the woman he had been married to for 9 years had built her own way out of his life without him noticing, and that she had taken nothing with her except her name. He sat on that couch until the light in the room was gone. It was past 8 when he finally moved. He put the petition back in its envelope and set the envelope on the bookshelf, not on the coffee table because he didn't want to walk past it every time he crossed the living room. Then he did the only thing his body seemed to know how to do anymore. He went to work. Not the office. He wasn't going to be seen in the office like this. He went to his study and opened the laptop and buried himself in a stack of deal memos he had been ignoring for a week. He read acquisition filings until his eyes burned. He drafted 3 emails to the London team and sent none of them. He opened a spreadsheet at some point, and around 2 in the morning he realized he had been staring at the same cell for 40 minutes without entering anything. He closed the laptop. He went to bed on his own side, left the other side made, and lay on his back in the dark with his hands laced over his stomach and did not sleep. The next day was Friday. He went to the office. He wore a suit. He held meetings. He shook hands. He said Monday and fourth quarter and non-starter, and let me think about it at the appropriate moments. And no one, as far as he could tell, noticed a single thing wrong with him, which was either a testament to his composure or proof that no one in his professional life had ever really been looking at him in the first place. He thought about that a lot over the weekend. Dana noticed. Dana, who brought him his second coffee at 10:15 on Friday morning, paused in the doorway of his office for a beat too long, and when he looked up, she said, "Mr. Voss, do you need anything?" "No." "All right." "Dana?" "Yes?" He almost said it. He almost said the thing out loud to the only person in the building who would have handled it with dignity. He almost said, "She left me." 3 syllables, just to hear someone else react to them. He didn't. He said, "Close the door on your way out, please." She closed it. He put his face in his hands for 30 seconds, and then he got back to work. That became the pattern for a while. He worked. He worked the way men like Adrian work when they can't feel their legs under them. He came into the office at 6 in the morning and left at 9 at night, and in between he did the thing he had always done, which was make his company bigger. Money was the thing he knew how to make. Money was the thing he could still make while gutted. He acquired a smaller firm in Houston that his board had been hesitant about for a year. He pushed it through in 10 days. He forced a deal in Singapore that his CFO told him twice was a mistake. He closed it anyway. He fired 2 senior VPs who had been underperforming, both of them men who had been with the company longer than he had, both of them men he'd had drinks with, both of them men he'd known the names of their children. He fired them on a Thursday morning in a conference room with Dana taking notes. And he did not flinch. And he did not explain. And he did not call them afterward. One of them called him 3 times. Adrian did not call him back. He could feel dimly that he was not behaving well. He could feel more dimly that he did not care. There is a thing men sometimes do when they are hurt and do not want to admit it. They sharpen. They get colder, harder, faster, more decisive. They mistake the adrenaline of grief for a newfound clarity. Adrian had seen his father do it after his older brother died in a motorcycle accident the year Adrian was 16, and his father, 6 weeks later, had closed a deal that tripled the value of the company, and the family had all quietly agreed that he was coping. He wasn't coping, he was amputating. Adrian hadn't understood that then. He understood it now because he was doing the same thing, and he could feel the phantom pain of the part he had cut off. On the Tuesday of the second week, Natalia came by the office. She did not have an appointment. She walked past Dana's desk with the easy confidence of a woman who had walked past it many times before, and she put her hand on the door handle of Adrian's office as if it were her own, and she came in without knocking. He was on a call. He held up a finger. She waited, leaning against the closed door with her arms folded in a navy dress he remembered buying for her in Milan. He hung up the call. He looked at her. "Hi," she said. "Natalia."
I haven't heard from you in almost 2 weeks. I told you I was going to be out of pocket. You said a family emergency. Yes. Everyone is fine, your mother? She's fine. Natalia waited. She was good at waiting. It was one of the things he'd once told himself he liked about her. He saw now with a cold little shudder of clarity that he had liked it because it was the opposite of what he had at home. A wife who did not wait, who simply disappeared, who conducted her own life while he was not looking. And the wrongness of his own read on the two women chilled him. Natalia had been waiting for him to tell her what to do with her. She had always been waiting for that. He had mistaken her waiting for patience. "Shut the door," he said. "It's shut. Sit down." She sat. She was still watching him. She had not put her bag down. "Natalia." He folded his hands on the desk. "I don't know how to say this gracefully, so I'm going to say it honestly. My marriage is over. My wife left me almost 2 weeks ago. I have not been a good husband to her, and I have not been a good man to you, and I am ending whatever this is right now, in this room, because I should have ended it a long time ago." She did not move for a long moment. Then she set her bag down on the chair next to her, and she sat back and she crossed her legs, and she looked at him with an expression he had not seen on her face before. It was not heartbreak, it was not rage, it was assessment. "Okay," she said. "How is this going to go?" "How is what going to go?" "The part where you end this." She tipped her head to the side. "I'm not an idiot, Adrian. I know what I am in your life. I've known since the second dinner. I don't need you to let me down easy. I need to know if I still have a job next Monday." He felt the heat come up his neck. "Of course you have a job." Because if I don't," she went on, as if he hadn't spoken, "I need to know now, so I can have a conversation with a friend of mine at a firm in Chicago I've been putting off. And if I do have a job, I need to know that you and I are going to be able to be in the same conference room next month without one of us making it weird, because I have earned my spot in this company, and I'm not going to lose it because a 41-year-old man couldn't keep it in his pants." He stared at her. He had never heard her speak like this. He had known her for almost 2 years, and she had been, in all of those 2 years, soft-spoken and deferential and attentive, and he realized now, listening to her, that she had been performing a version of herself for him the entire time. It had not even been a cruel performance. It had been a professional one. She had read him accurately and given him the version he wanted, and the fact that he hadn't noticed how good she was at it was, he understood, his failure, not hers. He had spent 2 weeks mourning a wife who had been performing nothing, who had been trying to show him her real self the whole time, and he had not even noticed his mistress had been performing either. He did not know anyone, apparently. He had not been looking at anyone. "You have your job," he said. "Good. I'm not going to make it weird." "Good." "Natalia." He hesitated. "I'm sorry. I'm genuinely sorry." Her eyes went a fraction softer, just a fraction. "Yeah," she said. "I know. I'm sorry too. For what it's worth, I hope she's okay." "She's okay." "Is she coming back?" "No." Natalia nodded, slowly, the way you nod when someone confirms a thing you had already suspected. "Then for what it's even more worth," she said, "I think she's smarter than you deserved." She picked up her bag. She walked out. She closed the door softly behind her. He sat at his desk for a long time after she left, looking at the space where she had been. He did not feel relieved, and he did not feel worse. He felt, if anything, a little less like a liar, which was a small currency, but a real one. That night he went back to the penthouse and stood in the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water instead of a drink. He had been drinking too much. He knew he had been drinking too much. He poured water, and he drank it at the sink, and he stood and looked out at the city and its dumb beauty, and he thought, for the 100th time that week, about calling her. He did not call her. He had become, in small, grudging increments, a man who did not call her. It was the first thing in a long time that he had been able to give her. It felt like nothing. He suspected correctly that it was the only thing she had ever actually asked him for. But not calling her did not mean not thinking about her. He thought about her constantly. He thought about her in meetings. He thought about her in the car. He thought about her at the gym, where he had started going again, hard, the way he had in his 20s, running until his legs shook, lifting until his hands were raw, as if he could outrun the thing in his chest by being physically tired. He couldn't.
The tired just made him quieter. The tired made it worse, actually, because when you were tired, you could not distract yourself from the truth. And the truth of Adrian's life was that it had shrunk to an apartment, an office, and the memory of a woman who had stopped loving him while he was on the phone with Tokyo. He did things in that first month that later he would not be proud of. He drove past her sister's brownstone in Brooklyn at midnight, twice, in his own car, alone, like a man in a movie about a man worse than him. He didn't get out. He didn't stop. He just drove past. Claire's apartment was on the second floor. The windows were dark the first time. The second time there was a light on in the kitchen. He saw a shadow move across it that could have been anyone. He kept driving. He hated himself, driving home over the bridge, but not enough to not do it the second time. He called her lawyer's office, Hal Tannen's office, 3 times. Twice he hung up before the receptionist finished saying, "Good morning, Tannen," and the third time he left a message with his name and the line, "Please let Ms. Hart know I respect her wishes and I will not be in contact." He hung up. He sat at his desk staring at the phone. He understood immediately that he had just been in contact. He understood that the message was itself the violation. He understood that a man who respected his wife's wishes did not need to announce that he respected his wife's wishes. He sent Marcus an email 10 minutes later asking him to go by Hal's office and convey his apology for the voicemail and confirm that it would not be repeated. Marcus wrote back one word. Okay. He went to a therapist. He didn't call her a therapist to anyone, including himself. He called her a consultant. Her name was Dr. Harriet Okoye, and she was a 60-year-old Nigerian-American psychiatrist with a practice on the Upper East Side that he had chosen because she did not take insurance and because a friend of Marcus's had used her after his second divorce and said she was, quote, a surgeon. Adrian went to her once a week for 45 minutes on Wednesday mornings at 7 before the office. He paid her $600 a session in cash. He did not tell anyone he was seeing her. Not Donna, not Marcus, not his mother. It was the first thing in his adult life he had done that no one knew about, and he understood, sitting in her small beige office on the 4th visit, that this was exactly what Lillian had been doing for years. Doing things he did not know about. And the symmetry was so unpleasant to him that he almost walked out. "You're quiet today," Dr. Okoye said at the 5th session. "I'm thinking." "About what?" "About how every single thing I'm doing right now to feel better is a thing my wife did first without me noticing. Therapy, walking, cooking for myself, not drinking, reading books, sitting in a room by myself." He laughed without humor. "I'm 6 weeks behind her. And she's 9 months ahead of me. 15 months behind, actually." Dr. Okoye did not smile. She didn't nod. She didn't do any of the therapist things he had expected. She said, "Mr. Voss, what you are describing is called grief. It is also, in your case, a form of imitation. You are imitating your wife because you admire her, and because you did not allow yourself to admire her while she was in your life. Does that sound correct?" "Yes." "All right. And what is your plan?" "My plan." "Yes. What is your plan? Not for your wife, who is not available to you as a project, but for your own life, which is..." He sat in the chair across from her, and he did not have an answer. He sat in the silence with his hands on his knees, and he realized, with a small, sick, dropping sensation in his chest, that in 41 years of life he had never been asked that question in a way that required an honest answer. His father had laid out his plan for him. His company had been the plan after that. His marriage had been assumed into the plan without ever being examined. And now the company was a machine that mostly ran itself. The father was 20 years dead, the marriage was a lawsuit, and he, Adrian Voss, alone in a beige office at 7:34 on a Wednesday morning, did not have a single thing in his life that he could honestly call his own plan. "I don't know," he said. "Good." "Good?" "Good," she said. "That is the first honest thing you have said in this room. Now we have somewhere to start from." He did not feel better when he left her office. He felt worse, in a cleaner way, which he was beginning to understand was what progress actually was. He walked out onto 78th Street and hailed a cab instead of calling his driver, and he rode downtown in the back of a beat-up yellow cab with his head against the window, and he watched the city go by, and he felt for maybe the second time since the morning of the envelope, something that wasn't rage and wasn't self-pity. It was closer to curiosity, The curiosity, specifically of a man who had just realized he did not know himself and might, at 41, have to. Across the river, Lillian was not thinking about him. She was trying not to, anyway. She was mostly succeeding. She had a routine now, which had happened faster than she had expected, and which her therapist, a sharp, gentle woman in her 50s named Dr. Levine, kept reminding her was a sign of health, not denial. Lillian got up at 7. She made coffee. She sat at the kitchen table with the coffee and a book, usually a novel, sometimes poetry, always something she had chosen, and not something that had been suggested to her by a magazine on a plane. She didn't look at her phone until 9. She went for a walk before lunch. She worked in her studio in the afternoons, and she had started painting again after a 10-year gap, not because she thought she was any good, but because she had liked doing it once, and she was trying to remember what she had liked. She cooked dinner for herself most nights. Small things. A piece of fish. A bowl of soup. A salad with actual effort in it. She ate at her kitchen table with the radio on, a jazz station she'd found on the dial her second week there, and she did not hurry through the meal. She saw Claire twice a week. She saw Dr. Levine once a week. She called her mother on Sundays. She went to a yoga class on Tuesdays and Thursdays at a studio 3 blocks away, run by a woman named Priya, who did not know her last name and did not ask. She had made, in the 6 weeks since leaving, exactly 2 new acquaintances, Marta and Sal downstairs, and a woman named June, who ran the flower stand at the corner bodega, and who, after a week of nodding at each other, had finally said, "You like those lilies, huh?" And Lillian had said, "Not really, actually. I'm trying to switch." And June had laughed and handed her a bunch of pink ranunculus and said, "Try these. On me. Welcome to the block." Lillian had walked back to her apartment carrying the ranunculus, and she had cried for the first time since leaving. Not about Adrian, about the ranunculus, about the block, about the sudden and ridiculous kindness of a woman she did not know giving her flowers she hadn't asked for. She cried for maybe a minute. Then she put the flowers in a water glass on her kitchen table, because she didn't own a vase anymore. She had left all the vases in the penthouse on purpose, as one of those small, perverse final decisions. And she made herself a cup of tea, and she sat and looked at the ranunculus, and she felt very precisely that she was beginning to be a person again. Claire had noticed it. Claire noticed everything. They were sitting, a few days later, at a table in a small Italian restaurant in Carroll Gardens, the kind of place Adrian would never have picked. Mismatched chairs, paper placemats, a bottle of house red that cost $30. Claire had her reading glasses on her head and a plate of cacio e pepe between them, and she was looking at her sister across the table with an expression that, between the two of them, didn't need translation. "What?" Lillian said. "Nothing." "Claire, I'm just looking at you." "Don't." "I'm allowed to look at you. I spent 3 years watching you get smaller. I'm allowed to look at you now that you're getting bigger." Lillian rolled her eyes, but she smiled. "I'm not getting bigger. I'm eating the same amount I always ate." "I don't mean your body, you vain little nightmare." Lillian laughed. She laughed in a way she had not laughed in a long time. Loud, graceless, the laugh that came out when she let it. Not the one she had produced in dinners to reassure the people around the table that she was having a nice time. Claire grinned at her with her fork halfway to her mouth. "There she is," Claire said. "Shut up." "No, there she is. I haven't heard that laugh since you were, 29. You sounded like a cartoon." "You sound like a cartoon. I'm proud of you." Lillian set her wine down. She looked at her sister. She said, "Claire, can I ask you something?" "Did you hate him?" Claire chewed. She swallowed. She took a sip of her wine. She looked for a moment at the window and then at her sister, and she said carefully, "I didn't hate him. I thought he was a bad fit for you. I thought that the first night I met him. I thought it again every Christmas. I never told you because you were a grown woman and because, frankly, for a while I thought I might be wrong. He was charming when he wanted to be. He was generous. He wasn't a brute." "No, he wasn't a brute. He just wasn't present." Claire set her fork down. "And I think there's a specific kind of loneliness, Lil, that comes from being married to a man who isn't a brute. Because you can't even be angry at him in a clean way. He didn't hit you. He didn't scream at you. He just didn't see you. And then when you try to explain to people why you left him, nobody understands. They keep saying, 'But he was so nice.' And you have to keep saying, 'Yes,
He was so nice, and I was so alone.
Lillian was very quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For saying that. Out loud. The way you just said it." She wiped her eye with her thumb. It was not a cry, exactly. It was an overflow. "I've been trying to figure out how to say it for 2 years, and you just said it in 2 sentences." "Yeah, well, I went to graduate school. We Claires pay for these sentences." Lillian laughed again. They ate the pasta. They ordered tiramisu that neither of them really wanted and split it anyway. They walked home along Court Street in the cold, arms linked, and Claire told her about her younger son's obsession with a stuffed dinosaur named Craig. "He has named a T-Rex Craig, Lil. I don't know what to do with this child." And Lillian laughed, and when Claire finally turned back toward her own block, she hugged her sister in the middle of the sidewalk for a long time, and she said, into Lillian's hair, "You did the hard thing, okay? You did the hard thing. Beshiku den strong.
Okay? I love you. I love you too." Lillian walked the rest of the way home alone. The air was cold and clean. She passed the bakery on the corner where she had now become enough of a regular that the woman behind the counter nodded at her when she walked past the window. She passed a man walking a greyhound in a quilted coat. She passed a bodega with a cat asleep on a stack of newspapers. She climbed her stoop. She let herself in. She walked up the 2 flights to her door. She unlocked it. She stepped inside her apartment. She set her keys in the little ceramic dish she had bought for $2 at a stoop sale in September. She turned on the lamp in the living room. She stood there for a second in the warm, small circle of light in her own home, and she listened to the quiet, and she understood without having to say it to anyone that the quiet belonged to her now and that no one could take it away. She did not think about Adrian that night. She was aware in some distant way that he was out there. She was aware that he was hurting. She was aware also that his hurt was not her responsibility, and that the years she had spent making his hurt her responsibility were the exact years she had disappeared in. She had not forgiven him. She was not at forgiveness. Forgiveness was a word other people used too quickly. She was at something much simpler, which was a sort of functional indifference. The ability to think his name without her body tightening. The ability to remember the good years without flinching. The ability to hope, in a distant, abstract way, that he was eventually all right, the way you might hope a person you had once worked with was all right, without needing to know for sure. That was progress. That was more than she had hoped for 6 weeks ago. She turned out the lamp. She went to bed. She slept. She slept through the night. Back in the penthouse, across the river, Adrian sat up in the dark at 2 a.m. with his phone in his hand. He had typed out a text. He had typed it out 5 times. He kept deleting it. "I'm not going to fight the divorce. Whatever Hal sends over, Marcus will sign. I just want you to know I understand now. I don't understand everything, but I understand more than I did. I'm sorry. I don't expect anything back from this. I just needed to say it once where you could see it." He read it again. He knew, as a man who had spent 20 years learning how to write messages to get a specific response out of people, that this was a message specifically engineered not to get a response. And he knew, because Dr. Okoye had drilled the distinction into him in their most recent session, that this was itself a kind of progress. A small one, but a real one. He sent it. He set the phone face down on the nightstand. He lay back down. He stared at the ceiling. His phone did not vibrate. It did not vibrate for 10 minutes, and then for an hour, and then for the rest of the night. At some point he slept. Across the river, in a Brooklyn apartment with old floors and a radiator that clanked and a bunch of pink ranunculus in a water glass on the kitchen table, a phone lit up silently on a nightstand, face down. The woman in the bed did not stir. She would see it in the morning. She would read it twice. She would not answer it. And she would not need the index card in her drawer, because it turned out when the moment came, she already knew exactly what to do, which was nothing at all. She saw the text at 6:42 in the morning. She had gotten up before her alarm, the way she did most days now, and she had padded into the kitchen in her socks to start the coffee, and only on her way back to the bedroom for her book did she pick up the phone and glance at it. And there it was. His name. A gray bubble. 3 lines of text she had to scroll to see all of. She stood in the hallway in her sweater and her socks, and she read it. Then she read it again. Her first reaction was not grief and not anger. Her first reaction was a sharp, almost physical recognition that the man who had written this message was not the same man she had left 6 weeks ago. The grammar was his, the voice was his, but the content was not. The Adrian she had been married to for 9 years would not have written the sentence, "I don't expect anything back from this." He would have meant something by it. It would have been a move on a board. This, the words on the screen in front of her, was a message from a man who had not yet figured out his next move, which meant he had, possibly, for the first time in his adult life, stopped playing. She stood with the phone in her hand and she felt something small and unwelcome flicker at the bottom of her sternum. Not longing, not pity. Something more like sadness on behalf of a person she had once known, like the sadness you felt when you heard an old friend from childhood was sick, a distant ache belonging to a room you didn't live in anymore. She went back to the kitchen. She set the phone face down on the counter. She poured her coffee. She drank it standing at the sink, staring at her own reflection in the dark window, because the sun wasn't up yet. She did not text him back. She had promised herself, and promised Dr. Levine out loud in the second session, that she would not answer the first message. Not because she was playing a game, but because she knew herself. And she knew that if she answered the first one, she would answer the second and the third, and by the 20th, she would be inside a conversation she did not want to be inside. Hal Tannen had said the same thing in plainer language. If you respond, he will interpret the response. It will not matter what you said. He will interpret it. That is what he does for a living. So don't give him the material. She did not give him the material. Instead, she did something she had decided weeks ago that she would do when he finally reached out in a way she believed was sincere, even though she had not, until that morning, actually believed he would. She opened the drawer in the small desk in her living room. She took out a piece of the cream-colored stationery she had brought with her from the penthouse. She had taken half the box. He would not miss it, and if he did, she would not know. And she sat down at the desk, and she wrote him a letter back. She wrote it in pen. She wrote it slowly. She crossed out 2 lines and started over on a fresh sheet. She wrote, "Adrian, thank you for the message. I'm not going to respond in writing beyond this, and I'd like you to not write to me again unless it's something your lawyer needs to tell mine. I believe that you're sorry. I can tell, from what you wrote, that something in you has moved. I'm glad for that. I mean it. You deserve to know yourself, and for a long time you didn't. And if that's starting to change, I am genuinely, honestly glad. But the change isn't for me. I need you to understand that. I'm not the person who gets to witness this chapter of your life. I used up my share of witnessing a long time ago, and I'm not willing to spend any more of the life I have left on it. That's not punishment. That's just a fact. Please don't send anyone to look for me. Please don't drive past Claire's again. Yes, I know you did that, twice. I wish you well. I really do. I'm not angry at you anymore. I just don't want you in my life." Those 2 sentences are allowed to be true at the same time. I used to think they couldn't be. I was wrong. L. She put it in an envelope. She addressed it to him at the penthouse. She walked it down to the mailbox on the corner that afternoon and dropped it in without letting herself hesitate. She mailed a paper letter to a man who had access to 1,000 faster ways to be reached, and she understood, walking back up her stoop in the cold, that the slowness of it was part of the point. A letter took 3 days. A letter could not be answered impulsively. A letter would arrive in his hand after she had already spent 3 more days becoming a person he didn't know. She did not feel triumph, dropping it in the mailbox. She felt the small grown-up relief of a woman who had done the thing she had said she would do. On the 3rd morning, Adrian sat at the kitchen island of the penthouse with her letter in his hand, and he read it twice. The first time he felt nothing. His brain had gone somewhere else. He was reading the words, but the words were not going in. He set the letter down. He poured a glass of water. He drank it. He picked the letter back up. The second time he read it, he felt something break loose in his chest. Not a sob. Adrian Voss did not sob in his own kitchen at 8 in the morning, but a small internal collapse. The kind of collapse where a man, sitting at his own counter, puts one hand flat on the quartz in front of him and leans his weight on it, as if he has just received news that is too heavy for his skeleton to hold up on its own. I'm not angry at you anymore. I just don't want you in my life. He sat with those 2 sentences for a long time. He understood, finally, what she had been trying to tell him for years in 1,000 smaller ways. that the absence of fight in her voice had not been the presence of love, that calm and love were not the same thing, that a woman could look at you across a table and feel nothing and still be polite. He had mistaken her peace for his possession. He had thought her stillness meant she was still his. He had been, he understood now, an idiot. He folded the letter along its crease. He put it in the drawer of his bedside table. He did not write back. He did not drive past Claire's again. He did what she had asked him to do, which was very little, which turned out to be the hardest thing anyone had ever asked him to do, which also turned out to be the only useful thing he had done in years. That was November. The divorce was finalized 2 days before Christmas. Adrian signed in Marcus's office on a Tuesday at 11:20 in the morning, in a conference room on the 34th floor of a building 2 blocks from his own. Marcus slid the pages across the table. Adrian did not read them. He had read them the week before, 3 times, alone in his study, with a glass of water and no bourbon. He uncapped a pen. He signed on 5 lines. He handed the pen back. "That's it," Marcus said. "That's it. You want to get a drink? It's 11:20 in the morning, Marcus." "Yeah," Marcus said. "I know." They got a drink. They went to a place on Lex that Marcus had been going to for 30 years, a dim old steakhouse with leather booths and a bartender who remembered Marcus's order. Adrian ordered a club soda. Marcus ordered a Manhattan. They sat at the bar. They did not say much. At one point, Marcus raised his glass and he said quietly, without looking at Adrian, "To the woman who had the decency to leave you cleanly, may we all be loved at least once by someone who knows how to walk away." Adrian raised his club soda. He drank. He went back to the office. He sat through a 3 o'clock meeting about a port deal in Rotterdam. He kept the meeting at 40 minutes. He went home. He did not call anyone. He ate a sandwich standing at the kitchen counter. He went to bed at 10. He did not know it yet, but that was the last day of the hardest period of his life. It was also the first day of the long second thing that was going to come after it, which was not healing, and which was not triumph, and which was not punishment. It was just the rest of his life, arranged around a fact he was finally willing to live with. Winter passed. He moved out of the penthouse in February. He had told himself for 2 months that he wasn't going to, that he was going to tough it out, that it was ridiculous for a grown man to be driven out of his own home by the memory of a woman who had chosen to leave. But on a Sunday in the middle of January, he had walked into the guest room looking for a book, and he had stopped in the doorway and looked at her empty closet through the open door across the hall, and he had understood that the apartment was not going to let him go until he left it. He listed it in February. It sold in March, at a small loss, to a hedge fund manager and his second wife who had 2 small children and a Bernese mountain dog. Adrian was glad about the children. The apartment had been far too quiet for far too long. He bought a smaller place, a 2-bedroom on the Upper West Side, in an older building with pre-war bones and a doorman named Ray who told Adrian within the first week that his own wife had left him in 2004, and that the secret of the first year was to buy a plant, take care of it, and not name it anything. Adrian did not know whether to laugh or cry. He didn't either. He bought a plant, a small ficus, from a florist on Columbus. He did not name it. He kept it alive. Months later, he would look at the ficus and understand, somewhat embarrassingly, that Ray had given him the first real advice anyone had given him in years. He kept seeing Dr. Okoye every Wednesday at 7. He was not a good patient, exactly. He fought her on certain things, the way men who have always paid for what they receive fight the people they pay. But he kept showing up, and showing up turned out to be most of the work. She made him write things down. She made him call his mother every Sunday. She made him, at one point, volunteer once a week at a literacy program in Harlem, where he spent Thursday evenings helping a 63-year-old Dominican man named Luis learn to read English well enough to pass his citizenship test. And the first time Luis read aloud a whole paragraph from the pamphlet about American history without stumbling, Adrian had to look down at the table because his eyes had gone embarrassingly wet. He kept going to the literacy program for the rest of the year. Luis passed his test in June. Adrian flew Luis and his wife to a diner on Amsterdam to celebrate. Luis ordered eggs. They were terrible. They ate them together. He made, in that first year, exactly 2 real friends. Both of them were men he had known professionally for years and never spoken to outside of a boardroom. One was Richard Navarre, a corporate attorney at a rival firm who had lost his wife to cancer in his 40s and had been living alone ever since. He and Adrian started meeting for coffee on Saturday mornings at a diner on Broadway. The other was a cellist in the New York Philharmonic named Anwar, whom Adrian had met at a fundraiser years ago, and re-met, by accident, on a Sunday afternoon at the public library, and who invited Adrian to an orchestra rehearsal that cracked something quiet open in him that he had not known was there. Adrian started going to the symphony once a month, alone. He bought a small book of the program notes each time and read it during intermission. He never told anyone he went. It was a thing of his own. It was one of the first things of his own he had ever had. He did not date. He was not ready. More importantly, he did not want to inflict himself in his current condition on any other person. He understood now that he had inflicted himself on Lillian at a moment when he should have been alone. He was not going to do it twice. He told Dr. Okoye this once, somewhere around the end of his first year, and she had looked at him over her glasses and said, "That is the most adult sentence you have said in this room, Mr. Voss. I congratulate you." He did not feel congratulated. He felt tired, but he also felt, and this was new, honest. The company did well. The company always did well. He noticed in that first year that he had stopped caring whether it did well for the reasons he used to care, the win, the number, the story, and started caring for reasons he had not previously had the capacity for. He started caring whether his people were okay. He stopped firing people in conference rooms with Dana taking notes. He went to Dana one afternoon in April, a year and a half after Lillian had left him, and he said, "Dana, I have never asked you anything about your life, and I would like to, and I understand if the answer is no." Dana had looked at him for a long time. Then she had laughed. Not meanly, just a real startled laugh. "Mr. Voss," she'd said, "my son is at Boston University. He wants to be a marine biologist. My mother is in Queens with my sister, and she has early-stage Alzheimer's, and we are working it out day by day. My husband died 11 years ago of a heart attack in a hotel room in Phoenix, and I have not remarried, and I do not plan to. I go to a book club on the second Tuesday of every month. I prefer red wine to white. I have never been to Europe, and I would like to go before I am 60. You have worked with me for 10 years. You are welcome." He had just sat there. Finally, he had said, "Thank you, Dana." "You're welcome, Mr. Voss. Please, Adrian." She'd paused. She had never called him Adrian. She did not call him Adrian that day either, but she had nodded and she had smiled, and something in the doorway had changed subtly and permanently between them. 6 months after that, he promoted her. Not in title. She had been his executive assistant for a decade and didn't want to be anything else, but in compensation. He doubled her salary without her asking. She tried to refuse. He did not let her. It was, he thought privately, one of the first times in his life he had spent money in a way that had nothing to do with what he wanted back. Across the river, Lillian's first year was not as dramatic, by which she meant it was harder. Drama was easy, she had come to understand. Drama gave you adrenaline. You could ride the wave of drama for weeks at a time. It was ordinary life that ground you down. The Sunday nights, the Tuesdays with no plans, the third consecutive dinner alone, the moment at the grocery store when you realized you were buying a single yogurt because there was no one else in your apartment who would eat it. There were weeks in the winter where she wondered what she had done. Not because she wanted Adrian back. Not ever once. But because there was a particular loneliness that ambushed her sometimes. Washing a single plate at the sink, walking past a couple laughing on the sidewalk, waking up at 3 a.m. to the sound of her own radiator, that felt, for a minute or two, like she was being asked to pay for her freedom in a currency she hadn't anticipated. She told Dr. Levine this. Dr. Levine said, "That is the actual cost of an adult decision. You will feel it. You are allowed to feel it. It does not mean you made the wrong decision. It means you made a decision that required something from you. That is what a real decision feels like." Lillian said, "I hate that." Dr. Levine said, "Yes, most people do." She kept painting. She got better. She would not have said that about herself out loud, but her work changed in small, unmistakable ways over the winter. The colors got braver, the compositions got simpler, her hand got steadier. In March, she tentatively brought 3 canvases into a small gallery on Atlantic Avenue run by a woman named Rosalind, who had been recommended to her by a woman she had met at Priya's yoga class. Rosalind had looked at the paintings for a long time without saying anything,
and then had looked at Lillian and had said, "These are good. Not decorative good, actual good. I'll take all 3, and I want 6 more by the end of May." Lillian had walked home so stunned she forgot to take the train and ended up crossing the Manhattan Bridge on foot in April, drizzle with her scarf unraveling around her neck and her phone dead in her pocket, laughing out loud twice at nothing, like a person who had finally remembered a joke from 20 years earlier. She sold out the first show. A group exhibition, 4 artists, her 3 canvases all gone by the closing night. She made, after Rosalind's commission, $4,200. She had never in her adult life made a dollar that had not been in some way downstream of Adrian's. She took the check to the credit union in Queens where her little invisible account still lived, and she deposited it in person, and she stood at the window afterward looking at the balance on the receipt. And it was only then, on a Tuesday afternoon in May, with a $20 bill and a receipt in her hand, standing in a bank branch in Queens, that she actually cried about the whole thing. She did not cry over Adrian. She cried because she had made $4,200 that was hers. She cried because the 20 years she had spent as someone's beautiful wife had not, it turned out, killed the 22-year-old girl who had stood on the Brooklyn Bridge and felt the city give her an answer. That girl, it turned out, had been waiting. She had a second show, alone, in September. Rosalind gave her the whole gallery for 3 weeks. Lillian hung 22 canvases herself. She invited 14 people, not including Claire and the nephews. 9 of them came. 2 were Marta and Sal from downstairs, wearing the nicest clothes she had ever seen them in. 1 was June from the bodega, carrying, of course, a bunch of pink ranunculus. 1 was Priya. 1 was Dr. Levine, whom Lillian had almost not invited, and then had, because her therapist had once told her, in a rare moment of personal disclosure, that she liked to see how her clients' lives bloomed. Lillian had never used the word bloomed about herself. She had not cried the night of the opening, but walking home at midnight after everyone had gone, she had passed under a streetlight and caught her own reflection in a parked car window. A woman in a dark green dress with paint on her cuff and a glass in her hand and her hair loose, and had not recognized herself for half a second, and had laughed, because not recognizing yourself turned out to be not the worst thing in the world. Sometimes it was the thing you had been praying for. She sold 11 of the 22 canvases. 1 of them went to a collector who paid $7,000 for a single piece. Lillian found out about the sale by email the next morning, and she sat at her kitchen table in her pajamas, and she stared at the email for a long time. And the first thing she felt was not pride. It was the strange and dignified feeling of a woman whose life had, at last, become a thing she could point at. She did not tell Adrian. She did not think about telling Adrian. She understood by then that she no longer performed the milestones of her life for him, even inside her own head. That was its own kind of freedom, and for a long time she had not known it was possible. She did think about him sometimes. She would be honest with herself about that. She thought about him when she saw a certain kind of silver-gray suit on a man getting into a car. She thought about him when she heard the old Chet Baker album he used to play. She thought about him, oddly, every time she saw an article in the business section of the paper about his company. She had not stopped reading the business section, though she had started reading it the way you read about a country you used to live in, with detachment and a small occasional homesickness. She learned things about him, sideways this way. She learned that he had sold the penthouse. She learned, from a small item in a profile of someone else, that he had donated a significant amount of money. In his name, which was unusual for him, he had always preferred the anonymous gift, to a literacy foundation in New York. She learned that he had stepped back from the day-to-day, elevating his COO to run operations, keeping a hand on strategy, but no longer on the floor. She did not know what to make of any of it. She did not have to. It wasn't her job anymore to interpret Adrian Voss. It was a relief, actually, not to. She was happy. She would not have used that word at the 1-year mark. By the 2-year mark, she would. It was a modest happiness. It was not triumphant, and it was not complete, and it was not the happiness of a woman who had gotten everything she wanted. It was the happiness of a woman who had finally stopped pretending, which it turned out was a specific and underrated form of happiness that no one talked about because it didn't photograph well. She had a cat by then, a gray rescue, about 3 years old, with a nicked ear and a skeptical face. His name was Walter. He slept at the foot of her bed. He did not need her to be anyone. She had made, by the 2-year mark, 3 or 4 real friends. Priya. Rosalind. A painter named Simone, who had become a particular friend, a woman Lillian's age who had her own long, complicated past, and who, on a Friday night in July, had shown up at Lillian's door with a bottle of wine and a bag of nectarines and said, "I'm too sad to be alone tonight. Can I sit in your kitchen?" And Lillian had said, "Please." And they had sat in the kitchen until 2 in the morning talking about nothing. And that had been one of the best nights of Lillian's adult life. And nothing about it had been arranged or expensive or photographable. She had thought, falling asleep that night after Simone went home, that she had spent the first 40 years of her life believing happiness was a destination, and she had spent the last 2 years learning that it was just a series of Friday nights with people who showed up. She did not, at the 2-year mark, want anything back. Not the penthouse, not the ring, which was somewhere in a safe she no longer had the combination to, not the man, not the life, not even the time. There was a version of her, somewhere, who was angry about the years, who believed fiercely that she had spent 9 years she could not get back inside a marriage that had taught her nothing. She could not have learned more cheaply somewhere else. She acknowledged that version of herself. She did not pretend the version was wrong, but she did not live inside the version. She lived instead in a second-floor apartment in Brooklyn with a cat and a studio and a kitchen and a window that got good afternoon light, and she understood that the most useful thing she could do for the 32-year-old girl she used to be was not to rage on her behalf, but to build, with the rest of her years, a life that girl would be proud of. She was doing it. She had done it. On a Saturday morning in October, 2 years almost to the day from the night she had left, Lillian Hart walked out of her building to go to the small farmers market they held in a schoolyard 3 blocks away. She wore jeans and a brown wool sweater and a canvas bag over her shoulder. She had her list in her head: onions, 2 yellow and 1 red, a bunch of cilantro, a loaf of the sourdough they only had on Saturdays, apples if the orchard from upstate was there. She walked the 3 blocks in the clear, cold air, with her hands in her pockets and her face turned up toward the sun, and at the corner of her block, waiting for the light to change, she heard a voice behind her, a man's voice, clearing his throat in a way that was instantly, unmistakably familiar. And before she turned around, she knew. She turned around slowly, the way you turn toward a sound you have rehearsed for in your head without knowing it. And there he was, 6 feet away on the sidewalk, in a dark gray overcoat and a navy scarf, his hands in his pockets, his breath making a small white cloud in the cold air. He had gotten thinner. That was her first observation. Not gaunt, but thinner, in the way men in their 40s get thinner when they have decided, after a long time of not deciding, to take care of themselves. His hair had more gray in it at the temples. There were lines at the corners of his eyes she did not remember from the penthouse. He looked, she thought, more like a person than he used to. She had not seen him in 2 years. Lillian. Adrian. They both said the names carefully, like 2 people handling a glass they had broken once before. The light changed at the corner behind her. She did not cross. She stood where she was. A woman with a stroller went around them. A man with a small dog went around them on the other side. Adrian did not move toward her. He stayed 6 feet away, which was, she thought, the first intelligent thing she had seen him do with his body in a decade. "I wasn't looking for you," he said. "Okay. I want you to know that first. I wasn't looking for you. I'm here for..." "There's a coffee shop on Smith Street. Richard Navarre, he's a friend. He lives in the neighborhood now. We meet on Saturdays. I walked from the train. I was going to cross here." She said nothing. He seemed to realize that the explanation was too long. He shut his mouth. "Okay," she said again. "I believe you. I can keep walking, if you want." "Yes," she said. Then, because she had promised herself in a dozen rehearsals of this moment that she would not be smaller than she was, she added, "No, actually, wait." He waited. She looked at him. She looked at him properly, for the first time in what she was only now realizing had been much longer than 2 years. She had not really looked at him in the penthouse. She had looked past him for the last 3 years of their marriage, because looking directly at him had become unbearable. She looked at him now, on a sidewalk in Brooklyn, on a Saturday morning in October, and she saw a man, not her husband, not her betrayer, not the ghost she had been so careful for 2 years to not let take up any room in her head. Just a man, a little older, a little tired,
a little less sure of himself than he had ever been in his life. "You look well," she said. She meant it. She was, among other things, a person who tried not to lie on sidewalks. "Thank you." He almost said something more and stopped. Then he said quietly, You look like yourself." She laughed, a single short exhale. "Yes, that's the idea. Can I—" He stopped. He started again. "I don't want to keep you. I know you are going somewhere. If I say one thing, if I say it here and if we don't turn it into anything, would that be all right?" "One thing," she said. He nodded. He took a breath. He was gathering himself, she could see, the way he used to before a board meeting, except with less confidence and more care, which was a combination she had never seen on his face before and which, for a second, made her throat do something she had to swallow down. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know you said in your letter you believed that I was. I'm telling you again anyway, because I want you to hear me say it out loud, just once, in your own life, in daylight. I was not a good husband. I was not a good man. I did not see you. I ran past you for 9 years, and I told myself I was building something for us, and I was lying. I was building something for me, and I was using you as the excuse, and I did not even realize I was doing it until you were gone." He paused. He glanced down at the sidewalk. He looked back up. "I'm not asking for anything," he said. "I'm not asking for forgiveness or for a conversation or for anything. I don't have the right. I just wanted to say it once where you could actually hear it because I said it to myself 1,000 times in an empty apartment and it was never enough." There was a long moment on the sidewalk where neither of them moved. She thought about what Dr. Levine would say. She thought about what Claire would say. She thought about her own index card in her drawer, which she had updated once, in a small fit of self-improvement, and then never looked at again. She thought about the 11 canvases that had sold at her show. She thought about Walter the cat, probably asleep on her bed at this moment, and Marta and Sal, and the bunch of ranunculus that would be on her counter by noon. She thought, he has not asked me for anything. She thought, he is telling the truth. She thought with a kind of distant, astonished clarity, I don't need this from him, and yet I am receiving it, and it does not hurt, and it does not move me, and I think it might actually be a good thing. "Adrian," she said. "Yeah. Thank you." His face did something, a tiny thing. The jaw unclenched half a centimeter, the eyes went glossy for a half second and then came back. He nodded. He did not trust himself to speak. She understood this because she had lived with him for 9 years, and she still recognized the particular small geography of his face when he was holding on. "I forgave you a long time ago," she said. Not because it was a gift to him, though in a small measured way it was. Because it was true, and because she wanted to say it, and because standing there on the sidewalk, she suddenly understood that she had been carrying the sentence around for months without having anyone to say it to. Not in the sense that you might be thinking. Not in the sense that it changes anything. I forgave you because I needed to, not because you earned it. I needed to be free of you, and I couldn't be free of you if I was still angry, so I let the anger go. It took me about a year. It was harder than leaving you, actually, but I did it, and I meant it, so. She paused. She adjusted the strap of the canvas bag on her shoulder. "So we're okay," she said. "You and me. In whatever sense we can be okay, after what happened. We're okay. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" He did not speak for a moment. Then he said, "I think so. Yes. Good. I won't contact you. I know. I really won't. I'm not saying it to have it hang there. I'm saying it because I want you to walk away from this sidewalk knowing that the door is closed behind you. From my side, too. I'm not going to show up at a gallery. I'm not going to pass your name to anyone. I read about your show, by the way. Second one, in the Observer piece back in the spring. I didn't go. I wanted to. I didn't." She did not know he had read about the show. She did not know he had wanted to go. She filed both things away without letting them do anything to her face. "Good," she said. "I mean, good that you didn't. Thank you. Are you—" He stopped himself. He shook his head. "Never mind. I was going to ask if you're happy. It's not my question to ask." She looked at him for a long moment. "Adrian," she said, "it's not your question to ask. You're right about that.
But I'll tell you anyway because I don't want you leaving here wondering about it for the rest of your life. Yes, I'm happy. Not every day. Not in the way you see in commercials, but in a real specific grown-up way that took me 42 years to get to. I'm happy. I like my life. I built it. It's mine. Good, he said, and his voice caught just a little on the single word. I'm glad. I'm glad. I believe you. He stood there for another second, as if he were waiting for the conversation to decide whether it wanted to end. Then he gave a small nod, to her, to himself, to the morning, and he said, I'm going to go. Okay? Take care of yourself, Lillian. You too, Adrian. He turned. He walked away from her, west along the block, toward Smith Street, toward his friend, toward the coffee and the rest of his Saturday and the rest of his life. She watched him go for maybe 10 steps. Then she turned the other way, and she crossed the street, and she walked the remaining 2 blocks to the schoolyard, and she bought her onions and her cilantro and her sourdough, and, from a woman she had never seen before at a folding table with a hand-painted sign, 3 small green apples that turned out, when she ate the first one on the walk home, to be the best apples she had ever had in her life. She did not cry. Going home, she did not shake. She felt, if anything, lighter, in the specific small way a person feels lighter after setting down a bag they had forgotten they were carrying. She let herself into her apartment. She put the groceries away. She filled Walter's water dish. She stood for a second at the kitchen window and looked down at the little garden behind Marta and Sal's, and she said out loud to no one, okay. And then she got on with her day. 3 blocks away, Adrian sat in a coffee shop he did not really remember walking into. Richard Navarre was already at a table by the window with 2 cups of coffee in front of him, both of them Adrian's because Richard had a theory about second cups and ordered ahead. Richard looked up when Adrian came in. Whatever he saw on Adrian's face made him stand up halfway out of the booth. You okay? Yeah. You don't look okay. I ran into Lillian on the sidewalk. Richard sat back down. He pushed one of the coffees across the table toward Adrian with the gentleness of a man who had been a widower for 11 years and who knew what ambushes looked like. Okay, Richard said. Okay. Sit down, drink that, tell me. Adrian sat. He did not tell him yet. He held the coffee between his hands, and he let the warmth come through the paper sleeve, and he looked out the window at the thin autumn light on Smith Street, and he thought, not for the first time in the last 2 years, but more clearly than ever before, about the shape of the life he had built in the wreckage of the one he had destroyed. He had not, he realized, been hoping to run into her. Not really. He had entertained the fantasy, the way all people who had lost someone entertain the fantasy of the accidental reunion, but the fantasy had always ended in some version of a door reopening, and he had gotten rid of that fantasy maybe 8 months in, when Dr. Okoye had said to him, quietly, Mr. Voss, at a certain point you will have to decide whether you want her back or whether you want to become the man who wouldn't have lost her. You cannot want both. One is about her. One is about you. Choose. He had chosen, slowly, over a period of weeks, the second one. He had not understood at the time that the second one would have to be a choice he made every day, not once. But he had made it, that morning, in her office. And he had kept making it. And here was the thing, he thought, watching an old man cross the street outside the window with a newspaper under his arm. Here was the thing he had not expected, sitting in this coffee shop at 43 years old with his ex-wife walking 3 blocks away toward a farmer's market in the opposite direction. He had expected, on the sidewalk, to feel hunger. He had expected to feel longing. He had expected to feel the small, cruel voice in his chest that had whispered at him for 2 years. Maybe if she sees you. Maybe if she sees who you have become. He had not felt any of those things. He had felt instead something much quieter and much more useful. He had felt relief. Not relief that it was over. Relief that he had at last actually done what a grown man is supposed to do with a great mistake. He had looked at it out loud in front of the person he had made the mistake against, and he had owned it. And he had walked away without asking her to make him feel better about it. That was the whole thing. That was, it turned out, the entire thing adulthood was about. And he had not understood this at 22 or at 32 or at 40, and he understood it now on a sidewalk in Brooklyn. Adrian, Richard said, drink the coffee. You're going white. I'm fine. Drink it. He drank it. He told Richard in a few sentences what had happened. Richard listened. Richard did not say much. When Adrian was done, Richard said, "What did she say to you at the end?" "She said we were okay." "Did you believe her?" "Yes." Richard nodded slowly. He took a sip of his own coffee. He looked out the window. Then he said, "Then you're okay. You don't have to feel okay yet, but you are okay. That's the cleanest resolution you were ever going to get with this, and you got it. That's more than most of us get. I know. So be grateful, and don't go looking for her again." "I won't." "I know you won't." They sat there, two men in a coffee shop in Brooklyn on a Saturday morning, and Adrian let the conversation with Lillian settle into him the way a meal settles, slowly, over an hour, becoming something his body could use. He did not know then what the rest of his life was going to look like. He did not know that he would never remarry, not because he hadn't tried, eventually, but because the two relationships he would have over the following decade would both end amicably at his initiation, when it became clear to him that he was not, and might never be, a man capable of the full-hearted, unguarded partnership that another woman deserved. He would not be bitter about this. He would understand it as a kind of earned limitation, a tax on a life he had spent his first 40 years living inattentively. He would make his peace with it. He did not know that he would, in his late 40s, become a quietly significant philanthropist, not the kind who put his name on buildings, which he had learned to find embarrassing, but the kind whose lawyer wrote a lot of anonymous checks. He would give the bulk of his wealth over the course of his 60s to a foundation that built libraries and public schools in neighborhoods like the one his father had come from. He would never speak publicly about this. Dana, who stayed with him for 20 more years, would know. She would never say a word. He did not know, standing in the coffee shop window as Richard paid the check, that the plant Ray the doorman had told him to buy on his first week in the new apartment, the ficus he had never named, would outlive Ray. It would outlive Marcus. It would sit on Adrian's windowsill for 31 years and follow him through 3 apartments, and toward the end of his life, be one of the few physical objects he would find himself sentimental about. He did not know any of it. He knew only, walking out of the coffee shop with Richard and shaking his friend's hand on the corner, that the woman he had once been married to was walking home in the other direction with a bag of groceries, and that she was happy, and that she had told him the door was closed, and that, for the first time in his entire adult life, he was going to respect a closed door without trying to pick the lock. He walked to the train. He took it back to Manhattan. He sat in a window seat with his hands folded in his lap and watched the tunnels go by. And somewhere around Grand Street he closed his eyes, and a small breath that had been waiting in his chest for 2 years finally left him. And a mile and a half away, on a second floor in a brownstone on a tree-lined street in Brooklyn, Lillian Hart set her groceries on the counter and washed her hands at the sink and took a single green apple out of the paper bag and walked through her apartment into the studio with it. And she bit into the apple, and she stood in front of the canvas she had been working on for 3 weeks, a large one, the biggest she had ever attempted, a simple composition of a woman's back in a window in late morning light. And she picked up her brush, and she got back to work. She worked until 4. She did not check her phone. She did not cry. She did not think about Adrian. When she finally stepped back from the canvas, she saw something in the light she had not seen before. And she adjusted 2 brush strokes in the upper corner, and she set the brush down. And she knew, the way painters know these things, that the canvas was nearly finished, and that it was going to be the best thing she had ever painted. She made herself dinner that night. She ate it at the kitchen table with the radio on. After dinner, she called Claire and told her, briefly and without drama, what had happened. Claire said, "How do you feel?" Lillian said, "I feel fine. I feel really, genuinely fine." Which, weirdly, is the part that feels like the win. Claire was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, Yeah, that's the part that's the win." She went to bed early. She slept well. She dreamed for the first time in 2 years a dream about painting. Just her hand and a brush, and a color she did not know the name of. And that was, more or less, how their story ended. Not with a reconciliation and not with a revenge. With an apology delivered on a sidewalk in autumn and received cleanly, and with 2 people walking in opposite directions down the same block, each carrying a life the other was no longer allowed to live in. There is a thing worth saying plainly before the end. What happened to Adrian Voss and Lillian Hart is not unusual. It is, in fact, one of the most common stories in the world. A man and a woman meet young, and they love each other, imperfectly, and one of them, slowly and without noticing, starts to treat the other one as furniture, a piece of the life they are building rather than the person they are building it with. It happens in penthouses. It happens in two-bedroom apartments. It happens in small towns and in cities with skylines and on farms and in suburbs with manicured lawns. It does not require betrayal, though sometimes there is betrayal. It only requires inattention, sustained over years, until the person who has been inattentive wakes up one morning in a kitchen that does not smell like anyone. The question is not whether this will happen to you. The question is what you will do with it when it does. If you are the one who has been unseen, if you are reading this or listening to this, and somewhere in your chest you are recognizing the shape of Lillian's silence, the specific loneliness of being married to a person who is not cruel, only absent, here is the thing no one tells you, which Lillian had to figure out for herself. You do not owe anyone your disappearance. You do not owe anyone 9 years of waiting in a doorway with 2 wine glasses while they hold up one finger. Your life is not a rehearsal for the life you will have after you leave. Your life is the thing you are living right now, and if the person you are living it with is not looking at it, you are actually required, if you intend to be a person of any substance at all, to eventually stop waiting to be seen and start seeing yourself. That can mean leaving. It can also mean staying. But either way, it has to start with you, because no one else is going to do it for you, and waiting for them to is the thing that will eat you. And if you are the one who has not been looking, if you are recognizing the shape of Adrian's empty kitchen, the specific cold of a note on a quartz island, the particular hollow of having woken up to a life you stopped being present in, here is the thing Adrian had to figure out, which Dr. Okoye put more cleanly than anyone. You cannot want her back and also want to become the man who would not have lost her. One is about her. One is about you. Choose. And if you do not get her back, and most of the time you will not, because by the time you realize you need to choose, the choice has usually already been made for you. You can still become the second man, not as a consolation prize, not as a way to impress some future partner, because it is the only honest way forward. The only other option is to stay the man who lost her, forever, and to spend the rest of your life in the company of that man. And that man is very bad company. Neither of them was a villain. That is worth saying. Adrian was not cruel in the end, so much as unformed, a man who had never been taught and had never taught himself how to pay attention. Lillian was not a saint either. She had her vanities, she had her silences. She had spent years inside a marriage she could have named out loud much earlier and hadn't, because naming it would have required her to do something about it, and for a long time she was not brave enough yet. Both of them were ordinary people who had made ordinary mistakes and ordinary choices. And the story of their marriage and their unmaking and their long separate recoveries was ordinary too. Only the specifics were theirs, which may be, finally, the point. Extraordinary lives are for movies. Ordinary lives are for us. And in an ordinary life, a person gets exactly one shot to pay attention to the person in front of them. And the people who understand this at 25 live one kind of life. And the people who understand it at 45 live another. And the people who never understand it at all live the smallest life of the 3. Adrian was lucky in the end because he got to be in the second category. Lillian was lucky in the end because she got out in time to live a life in which she was the one paying attention to herself. They did not see each other again after that Saturday morning on the sidewalk. Adrian kept his word. Lillian kept hers. Over the years, small news reached each of them about the other, sideways through mutual acquaintances, through the papers, through the random way the world recirculates people it has put down. Each of them would, on receiving such a piece of news, pause for a second and hold it lightly, and then set it down. Not with coldness, with peace, which, it turned out, was the thing they had both been after all along, without knowing it was what they were after. On a night many years later, in a small apartment on the Upper West Side, an older Adrian Voss, thinner now, gray all the way through, a man who had outlived his lawyer and his doorman and most of the people who had known him at his worst, would sit on a couch by a window with a book in his lap and a cup of tea on the side table and a ficus plant on the sill that had been with him for 3 decades. And he would think of her for a moment, the way he thought of her every few months. And he would smile, the small, private smile of a man who had learned, too late, but not never,
how to love a person by letting her go.
On the same night, in a Brooklyn apartment she had by then bought outright from a landlord who had decided to retire, an older Lillian Hart, silver-haired now, still spry, still painting, her hands still capable of holding a brush for 3 hours at a stretch, would stand at her kitchen window and watch the dusk come up over the little garden behind Marta's old house, where a young couple lived now, with a daughter who played in the yard on Sundays, and she would not think about Adrian at all. She would think about the painting on the easel behind her. She would think about the soup she was about to make. She would think about her life, her real life, the one she had earned by walking away from the other one, and she would feel, very faintly, very steadily, the small and durable happiness of a woman who had not asked to be freed and so had learned at 40 to free herself. She had built it alone. She had chosen it. It was hers. And that, in the end, in the oldest and plainest sense of the word, was the story. One woman who stopped waiting, one man who finally learned to look, 2 lives that did not come back together because they were not supposed to, and one sidewalk in Brooklyn in October where 2 people said the only words that were left to say and then walked in opposite directions into the rest of their days. The sun was bright on that sidewalk. There was a smell of wood smoke from somewhere. A dog barked 2 blocks away. A kid on a scooter went past, and life, indifferent and beautiful, went on. That's where we leave them. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end. If this story meant something to you, if you saw a piece of yourself in Lillian, or a piece of someone you used to be in Adrian, drop a word in the comments. Tell me what city you were listening from. Like this video so more people find their way to it. Subscribe if you haven't yet, because there are more stories like this one coming. Take care of the person in front of you tonight. Look at them. Really look. And if you're the one who hasn't been looked at in a long time, remember that you, like Lillian, are allowed to stop waiting. The door out of that room is closer than you think, and on the other side of it, a quieter, truer life is waiting to be built. It is never too late. It is only ever as late as right now. Good night. Be well, and I'll see you in the next one.